Hello, my name is Jessica, and I am here to talk about behavioral based interviewing. So, for me, I have seen both ends of behavioral based interviews as an actual candidate and also through working for over 7 years in human resource management as an HR generalist, as a corporate recruiter, and as a talent advisor. And in that role, um, my current role actually, I work with companies to identify top quality candidates and assess candidates to determine whether we would like to then hire candidates for specific positions. So I have worked with companies through a lot of different sectors, from your consumer product goods companies to marketing firms to retail, and all of the companies asked behavioral based questions in some capacity throughout the interview process. And one multinational company I've worked with actually used behavioral based interview questions more thoroughly and really heavily throughout their process to assess talent to be moved along the process and then eventually hired. So, what is a behavioral based interview and why do companies use those questions? Well, behavior based interview questions are questions that are going to be asking a candidate about a specific time when they did something. And for the company, asking behavioral based questions is important because it really does help the employer understand how a person thinks through situations and how they've actually acted in the past. So, a behavioral based interview question may be, for example, tell me about a time when you worked with a team to accomplish a task. Well, you're going to tell the company, what the situation was, what the task was, what you actually did during that specific example. And by telling them about that situation, you're really going to be able to show your thinking, what your natural actions and tendencies are, your behaviors are, and how they've been shown in a specific example. And it's not kind of like the if factor of I think I would or I would have done this. It actually shows what you've actually done in the past, which is a better indicator of what you would do in the role that is presented, that you're interviewing for. So it's a great way for companies to identify the right talent for specific roles. And it's also a great way for candidates to really talk about specific situations where they've made accomplishments. So that's really what a behavioral based interview is. There's plenty of information online about those questions, but I will say that I've seen candidates do really well when answering those questions, and I've also seen candidates really struggle with answering behavioral based interviewing. So I do want to talk about some tips from my end, having been a candidate answering those questions and having actually accepting jobs by answering those questions well, and also by seeing a number of candidates and what not to do and what you should do to really prepare and do really well during your interviewing experience. So, my number one tip for anyone having any kind of interview, especially with behavioral based interviewing, is to really understand the job and the company. So, whenever you are looking at the job description for a role, what you want to do is actually thoroughly, I know people don't always do this, including myself, but you should really read through the job description. Save the job description. I promise you, there will be a time when you want to come back to that job description. And sometimes companies may take down a job posting from online, and it may be difficult to find it again. Sometimes applicant traction is so high, and so they may need to take down the posting, or it just is taken down earlier than maybe your initial phone conversation even. So a lot of good information is provided in the job description, including a company overview. Typically companies will talk about their culture, and of course the job itself. So what kind of behaviors, what kind of skills are going to be needed in the job itself? What will the job actually do? You really need that information to, one, determine if you're going to really be interested in the role, and to also determine if you have the experience and you have portrayed those behaviors that you see the company is really looking for. So for example, I let's say I'm looking online on Indeed. Indeed is a job site, a job board that's very popular. Let's say I'm looking out there and I am seeing a job for systems engineer, and the company is AT&T. And they're describing their culture as a culture that's very dynamic, very innovative, looking for big thinking. And in this role, this person is going to be leading a team with creating new solutions. So you're seeing a couple of things there. So if a company is talking about innovation and big thinking, well, you know that a big behavior that the interviewer might ask you will probably be around like innovation. So you may be asked about a time when you brought a new idea to your team, for example. Another thing that you hear, and this is pretty common with a lot of companies because you are typically going to work with multiple people, not just siloed in most cases, but collaboration. So, or leading a team. If you have had that experience with leading a team, you'll want to think of some examples to talk about where you've actually collaborated with a group of people. So those are some things to really think about when you're looking at the job description and you're looking at information about the company. And they really are important in determining those behaviors because, I mean, companies really do lay out what they're looking for, and it's just up to you to identify that, identify specific keywords that you're seeing so that you know how to prepare for the interview. So now that you understand the role itself, you've read the job description thoroughly, you kind of highlighted some different things you see that would show some behaviors that you will need to talk about. Well, it's time to actually start pulling together examples that would showcase those behaviors that you've identified, right? So, okay, so thinking about some examples, one method that's really good to look at is called the STAR method. And I will put a link below with some online information that you can find about the STAR method. And really, with that message, you're describing a story for the interviewer. So so if I'm asked about a time when I worked with a team to accomplish a task, for example, I'm going to provide a specific situation, whatever tasks were involved, any actions that I took, and the results of the situation. So this could be a work example or also a school example. And the great thing about the STAR method is it really does help you give that story in a clear and concise way to where you're providing good information to the interviewer, but not in a way where you're all over the place. I've seen it time and time again where candidates may not have really prepared so well for the interview and didn't really follow that kind of flow. And the information that they then gave to me was really all over the place. They would go to a situation and they would start talking about the task they did. Then they would go back to the situation because maybe they forgot about something. Then they would go back to the task and the actions that they did. And it just makes it really difficult for the interviewer to follow your example. And it doesn't portray you in the best light. So with the interviews too, I would prepare to have some good details about the situation, However, you don't always have to give a ton of detail up front. So, with specific questions, you will want to give some good information about the situation at hand. So, there was a school project where we needed to research different companies and pull together a full SWOT analysis of the company and present it to the class for our final grade. And this was for a business analysis class, for example. So that would be the situation, right? The actions that you took. So if you met with the group, if you planned regular meetings, you put together a research schedule, you outlined what everyone was going to do within the team, you received suggestions and ideas from everyone and asked for feedback, etc., etc. Those are the actions that you took. um, so you talked through the situation, you talked through the task, you talked through the actions that you took specifically, and then you would round it out with the results. So we ended up presenting to the class. We had a full presentation with a well designed PowerPoint, and also everyone contributed to that presentation. It was 5 minutes and well received by the class and by the professor, and ultimately we did receive an A with that project. Done. Now, this was a school example, something quick that I could think of, but you would definitely want to tie in examples that are specific to the job at hand whenever you can. Now, for recent grads, you may use more school examples, and I think that's totally fine and pretty common. But definitely stick to the STAR method or a model that's similar that can really provide a way for you to talk through an example in a really just easy to flow, clear, and concise way. Know that you will be asked follow up questions, so I would do say to have details about the situation ready and talk to an example that's fairly recent for you. If you're asked, for example, okay, well, when you actually organized the group meetings, did you have any challenges with that? Well, you want to be able to answer that question. And if it was like 5 years ago, you're probably not going to be able to think so quickly about any follow up questions that the interviewer may have. So I always do recommend providing a recent example. And as far as preparing examples, I recommend having, just depending on what the interview is, if it's a phone interview, I recommend having at least about 5 examples that you can talk to, not memorizing them, not reading from them or anything like that, but just having them ready and something that's top of mind that you can talk to, that you've already pre-thought about and you know it well and can talk to it very well. For a face-to-face interview, depending on how many questions that, and most companies will tell you about how many questions they will ask, just depending on the time. So if it's a 3 hour long interview, for example, and you'll be asked 12 or 10 questions, I'll say, I would prepare 15 examples, 10 to 15, just so you're ready and you have multiple examples to be able to talk to. And again, in talking about the behaviors that we discuss, we know that we're not going to be able to predict the specific behaviors, but they should be more in line with what you're seeing are going to be areas of focus for that job and for that company. So, my next suggestion to help prepare for the behavioral based interviews are actually to just use your online resources. So, I mentioned Indeed earlier. Indeed and Glassdoor are two sites that typically most mid and large sized companies will have some kind of presence on. And that will be great and helpful because a lot of people will provide reviews and interview tips. So, past candidates may talk about their own interview experience and provide some uh, tips for the next person. So, I wouldn't rely heavily on that, but I do recommend looking at Glassdoor, especially because they do have an interview section, and a lot of times candidates are posting and sharing about their own experience. So if you you see that there is a trend towards certain questions, say you've seen a number of people saying specifically that they were asked about times when they were able to be proactive and take initiative on something, you should have some examples to where you can actually talk about experiences where you've done that, right? So that's my little tidbit there on using your online resources. Come on, it takes no time to just kind of scan and kind of see what other folks are talking about. Another thing about Glassdoor is that, come on, look at the reviews. If you're seeing that folks are saying, oh my gosh, the work-life balance is terrible, that's something you might also want to ask about during your interview. So it's just great to kind of use your resources online as well as you're preparing for your interview, because you're interviewing them as well. So there's just a host of information that you might also want to ask during your interview. So after you have reviewed the job description, you have your behaviors, you have prepared some examples that you're able to talk to, now is really time to think about how you're going to practice, because the first time that you do something, studies even show this, that you're not going to be the best. And even though practice doesn't make perfect, it definitely makes better, and it makes for you being more confident and more prepared. So I recommend actually saying your examples, talking through questions out loud. If you can, get a partner, get a friend, get a family member, and have them ask you some of the questions that you're identifying. There's plenty of websites online where you can find actual behavioral-based questions, and you can actually identify them by behavioral areas. So if you're looking for initiative, go online and look for some behavioral-based questions around initiative or innovation or what have you, whatever you've identified, and have someone ask you. If you can't get a friend, ask yourself. Do a little role playing with yourself. If you have like a pet dog or something, talk at them. The point is to get yourself talking and hearing what you're saying out loud, and getting comfortable with what you're saying, and also getting comfortable with just talking about yourself. During your interview, you will be asked to talk about your background and your experience, and you want to be ready to do that, and also be able to talk through and answer any questions that are posed to you as well. So my last tip for you is, when you are actually preparing for the interview, prepare, but don't over prepare. I have seen in a number of situations where a person has over prepared to the point where they're not even flexible. So if they're asked a question, for example, that they did not prepare for, they're completely thrown off, they're nervous, and it leads to a bad experience. So I would say, when preparing and making your notes and working through your examples, keep your notes. Please bring them to the interview and everything. That actually will show that you're prepared and serious to the interview. Can't go wrong there. But don't depend on your notes. Be able to talk through your examples without your notes, but know that your notes are there if you need them. As far as over preparing as well, so I would recommend not over preparing to the point where you're nervous or you're not being yourself. Ultimately, you want your personality to come across. You want to provide real examples that you've actually been through. Don't lie or don't try to make up something that you think the interviewer will want to hear. Use real examples, talk through these situations, be comfortable and get comfortable with them, and just be yourself. When you're not being yourself, you're going to make yourself more nervous. You're going to be acting in a sense, and it's just not going to be a good experience for you. So overall, I would say with behavioral interviews and how to approach them, start from the beginning with reading that job description and understanding the role and identifying any behaviors that you can see from that posting. Start preparing for what you're seeing in that job description. And if you have a phone interview first, you can actually ask the recruiter or hiring manager, whoever's talking with you, what are some qualities that are going to be needed in the role? And they will most likely tell you, we're really looking for someone that shows initiative, for example, and they will most likely go in depth with you. Recruiters want you to succeed. If we can tell if you're really interested and you're a good candidate for the role. And sometimes you're a good candidate, however, you're just not good at interviewing. And we want to help you present yourself well throughout the process. So feel free to ask them. Next, prepare those examples. Start getting yourself ready, whether it's writing through examples, note them down, but you definitely want to talk through the examples. Number 3 is look online. Look online for reviews, see what other people are saying, learn about other experiences, and use them to your advantage. 4 is to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Do not just write down a bunch of examples, bring your notebook into the interview and go from there. I want you to actually practice, talk through your examples, and be 100% ready when you go into that interview. And overall, you'll be very confident, and that is key. And lastly, be yourself, and remember that during an interview, it is a two-way conversation and a two-way discussion. So yes, you are being interviewed, but you're also interviewing that company. They are looking at you for a reason. They're interviewing you for a reason. Obviously, you have talents that they would like to be brought into their company. So the same way they're interviewing you, you should have some questions ready and prepared as well. And just be natural, be yourself, and get to know your potential new teammates. All right, so that's all I have for you today. If you'd like more information around behavioral based interviewing or general tips, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I'll share a link below. Feel free to follow me there. Or you can also find me at my newly published blog, and that is called Pretty Little Career Guide. I'll put a link there as well. I did just write a post about behavioral based interviewing, and I've gone a little more in depth with that blog post. So if you're interested in checking that out, I'll definitely have that link below. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Good luck on your interview. If you are an active job seeker right now, just know that you will find a good role for yourself soon, and I am going to be continuing to post some content out to help you along the way. Thanks for watching. Bye.